In this episode, we're going to learn from an elite coach in Kenya about the pros and cons of high volume training. All right, so I'm back on with Coach Hugo. Hugo, thank you so much for joining me today for yet another podcast episode.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So today our topic is going to be high volume training. But before we hop into that, maybe you can remind our listeners how you became a running coach and what you're doing right now.
Okay, yeah, it's a good one. So I've been running since the age of 15. So I think that's where it started, just getting an interest in running and finding out that you're pretty good in it. And then, yeah, it became my passion. And then I studied human movement sciences, which is kind of a perfect background for a coach. But without a plan of being a coach ever, I just liked the study, and I thought, oh, it's fun, it's interesting. But then at the end of my career, this was the end of 2014. So by that time I was 37 years old, and getting some injuries, and I wasn't running as fast as I was before. Like I used to run about 2 hour 12 on the marathon, and then some point it was going down to 2 hour 14, 2 hour 15. So I started thinking about life after running, and I was lucky. I was approached by the people behind the NN running team. And they started a team in India together with an Indian company, and they asked me to be the coach there. So, yeah, 2 weeks later, I was in Bhopal, a city in India, and standing in front of a group of 50 boys and girls, and I had to select the best of them. And yeah, that's where my coaching journey started. And yeah, so that's how it started. And then after that, I started coaching some Kenyans as well, student athletes. Some of them are now in the US, are studying. Some of them are done already. Some of them are still coming. Actually, one of them got his visa just last week. So yeah, that's also pretty exciting. I like, helping people in their life in that way. And then I'm coaching runners online as well. So lots of different things. And of course, people will come to Kenya to train with our Kenya camp.
Yes, now you live in Kenya, you're married, you have kids, and that is your life, and it sounds fun and awesome. And you and I have talked about various topics in the past, but one of the things that we wanted to talk about is high volume coaching. I know that from a lot of the elite running coaches, they say volume makes a huge difference. But then over the past few years on social media, etc., there's a lot of US based running coaches that say, hey, you don't need to put in that many miles. You can still do it by completing HIIT training, etc. But let's unwrap all of that because obviously the
Sure.
concern with high volume code, how high volume miles is that you can get injured. So maybe talk to me a little bit about what you've observed over the last few years with this new trend of running less and still wanting to achieve the same thing in essence.
Well, yeah, that's a good topic, Letty, and a good question. It is definitely true that mileage matters. Generally, we know that aerobic volume, whether it's running or cycling or on an elliptical, it helps to get better, to create a strong aerobic base. And yeah, that's why, of course, you see that if you look at elite runners, I mean, there's variation between what people can handle, right? So some of them who are on relatively low volume are running 100 miles a week, and some others are running 150 miles a week. But you don't really get anyone reaching the international top or even the national top normally on like 70 miles or 60 miles a week, right? So that tells you that mileage matters. But that being said, many people are not elite and don't have an intention of becoming elite, and they have their constraints, right? Because they have a family, they have kids to take care of, they have jobs or studies, and yeah, they are limited. They're just, they just don't have the time, and they can't recover as much as the elites. So then you have to find a balance because, like you said, it's true, there's a risk of being injured. I've coached so many runners, amateur runners who have a full time job, they can't run more than 50 or 60 miles a week most of the time because that's, yeah, they have to work so much and have other duties to do. And then recovery is not the same as with elite runners who have, after a workout can go back to bed and sleep and get a massage and all that. So, yeah, you have to find the balance there. I think that's the first thing I can say about that.
And so, for the purpose of our conversation, let's define what we call high volume here. I think you kind of alluded
Right.
60, 70.
Well, yeah, if you talk about elite runners, right, it's a different story from amateur runners. For me, as a coach of both elite and amateur runners, it's, yeah, I use a different standard, of course. So for me, for an amateur runner, I would consider 60 to 70 miles pretty high mileage. I don't know if you agree with that, but I feel like yeah, that's for someone who has a full-time job running around 60 miles or close to 100 kilometers a week. I think that's pretty high mileage. Of course, for an elite runner, that's low mileage. But you know, uh, let's now talk mostly about amateur runners because those are, our listeners, I think. So I think for an amateur runner, running around, yeah, 60 miles a week or doing about, that's how much, about 7 to 8 hours of running per week. That's pretty high mileage. And then when you talk about lower mileage, you talk maybe about you know 20 to 40 miles a week, 20 to 30 maybe, and then with more intensity. So yeah, I would say, I think the truth is that mileage still matters also for amateur runners. It's only that if you are limited, so limited that you can just do 3 sessions per week, right? So let's say you have time on a Tuesday, a Thursday, and a Saturday. That's all you can do. And maybe Tuesday you have an hour, Thursday you have an hour, and then Saturday you have a bit more time because it's the weekend. You can't make 60 miles a week. That's just going to be impossible with that. So then I can imagine as a coach, if I have an athlete who is like that, who says, look, coach, I have Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. That's when I can train, nothing else. Yeah, I would say, okay, we can do some more quality, throw in some more, high intensity training, some more intervals, and still get the, the best possible result within our constraints. But that doesn't mean that that method in general is still is like better or equal to running more miles, right? So you're kind of, yeah, I don't know. In Holland we say you're, so it's like you're in a boat and you have certain pedals and you have to do it with what you have. So you can't change that, right? So on the other hand, if someone would come to me and says like, okay, I have, I can train every day. But I would actually prefer just to do like 3 times a week high intensity training. Yeah, because it saves me time. Can I get the same result as when I would train 6 times a week, so more mileage and just more easy training? Then I would also be honest and say, yeah, probably not, right? Because you need a certain amount of easy running to get the most benefit of your higher intensity training. And this, people talk about HIIT training, high intensity interval training. That's kind of a modern word, but it's people have been doing interval sessions, of course, since the, I don't know, 1920s or before that, right? Emil Satopek was doing 50 times 400 meter, stuff like that. So yeah, interval sessions are not new. We some coaches call it HIIT now, but yeah, basically any type of interval session can be called HIIT, right? So they are useful too, but there's nothing magic about them, right? Doing one interval session per week and maybe one longer interval or tempo session and one long run is still the best way to go for most runners. And then you want to fill that up with as much easy running as you can do. That's basically the formula that still works for most runners.
Yeah, and I don't know if you have heard about this, but there is obviously with DNA testing, Now there is a
Hmm.
website, I think it's called Run or something like that, where you can plug in your raw data from your DNA, excuse me, from your DNA. And with that, you it tells you whether you are a person that responds better to endurance or high intensity or speed. Now, at the same time, I don't know how reliable this is, right? Because DNA is usually, it works because it's traceable to certain regions. So I don't know enough about it to understand why certain DNA strands will tell you which one you respond better to. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, vaguely, but from what I heard about it also is that it's not yet accurate enough. Um, I think as coaches, we know that there's difference between athletes, right? So some athletes respond great to an increase in mileage, and other athletes don't, or less to a lesser extent, right? So, yeah, that is true that there are differences. So generally, we try to kind of distinguish a little bit between more fast twitch runners and more slow twitch runners. So slow twitch runners typically are runners who can handle more mileage, who recover quickly from doing an hour, 2 hours easy running. Whereas the fast twitch runners are people who find it much easier to do like a high intensity session, a strength session, a fartlek session, hill sprints. They recover quickly from that, but they don't recover as quickly from doing easy mileage. Um, but yeah, that being said, you even fast twitch runners nowadays want to run a marathon, right, or a half marathon. So you still have to prepare for that event. So um, yeah, you need a combination. It's often the difference between fast twitch and slow twitch runners is not really that big that you say, okay, for a fast twitch runner, I'm just going to do like 3 hit sessions per week and that's it. Mostly that still doesn't work, even for a fast twitch runner. It's just that they typically can't handle as much mileage as easily as the slow twitch runner. So you have to be a little bit careful with that. And with the fast twitch runners, also you sometimes it's harder for them to do, like, for example, a 5 mile or a 10 mile tempo run at a moderate pace. They find it easier to do shorter intervals with very short recovery, like, you know, 2 minute reps with a 30-second break, for example, rather than like a long tempo run where they can more easily kind of go over the edge and kind of kill themselves in training. So yeah, there are differences between fast twitch and slow twitch runners, but not to that extent that you can say, okay, if I do a DNA test and it shows like I'm a fast twitch runner, I'm not going to respond to mileage. So let's just stick to 3 sessions a week of high intensity. Typically, that just doesn't really work, right? To be able to handle that high intensity training and for your body to respond well to that, you need a certain amount of easy running to build an aerobic base. That's still the truth for like 99% of runners. So yeah, you still need a good mixture. So like I said, it's mostly still like you do an interval session once a week, maybe. You do a bit longer tempo, whether it's like a non-stop tempo of 5 to 10 miles, or it's something like 5 by 6 to 7 minutes intervals with a 2 minute recovery or something like that, something like more at your threshold. And then you do a long run. And then yeah, whether you have time and you have the energy and you can recover from it, you can add more and more easy runs. So that's still the method that works for most runners.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thanks for explaining it. And maybe we can nerd out a little bit more on the primary physiological benefits that somebody gets by just running volume. If you could run as much volume as possible,
Right.
obviously at a slow pace to keep from getting injured, what is it that happens to our bodies?
Yeah, so there's different adaptations. Of course, I think one of the first things that people notice when they start running or cycling or cross training is that your heart rate changes, right? So your like resting heart rate goes down because your heart grows a little bit, so it can pump more blood with each beat, right? So yeah, that's one of the first things you notice. Other things that you don't really know that they're happening, but we know them from science, is that you get a lot more mitochondria. So the mitochondria are those kind of tiny, kind of little fabrics in our muscle cell that help us to, that help you to produce ATPs or energy, right, out of food. So they are extremely important. And the more mitochondria you have, the better you can respond to harder workouts. Another thing that happens is that what we call capillarization. So capillarization is when your body kind of creates all those tiny little blood vessels between the major blood vessels. So yeah, rather than just having a few highways in your muscles, you have like a lot of smaller roads in between. So the blood, the energy that your body produces can reach the muscles much better because because of that capillarization, it just comes everywhere and comes closer to where it's needed, basically. So I think those are the three important things, your heart, your capillarization or blood vessels, and then um, the mitochondria, of course. So those things are important. They are, and what we know is that we haven't found a limit yet to how much training is enough, right? So we can't say like, okay, if you're an elite runner and you're running 150 miles a week, that's the absolute maximum. If you do more than that, it becomes junk mileage. It's like it's useless. No, it's not like that. That's why some elite runners, they feel like they can't handle more running because of all the impact on their legs, but they start to cycle or they start to do, other forms of cross training to bring their heart rate up and still have an aerobic workout. So we still call it aerobic mileage, right? Because aerobic mileage doesn't have to be running mileage. So if you are one of those runners who feels like, yeah, 3 or 4 times running per week is the maximum you can handle, you might benefit from doing 30 to 60 minutes of cycling, right? Or standing on an elliptical. Um, because, yeah, those are different ways of bringing your heart rate up and still get an aerobic workout without the impact that running has.
Yeah, no, thanks for explaining that. That sounds amazing. And if we don't have any time limitations and we just keep running, what are some of the injuries that you see in runners if they overdo it? In other words, what tends to kind of give first?
Yeah, to be honest, that depends really on the person. So you have some people who just generally get tired. So especially people who are very strong, right? If you have a history of doing lots of gym work or you just do enough strength training, then you likely to notice that you just get tired. You just in the evening you're sitting on the couch and you just feel like worn out. That's one of the first things that people who are not likely to get injured notice, that they lose the appetite for training. So for me, that's also a big sign when people are strong and they don't get injured, but they just lose the appetite for training. They just feel a little less happy. They just feel like they have less energy. But then in terms of injuries, of course, it depends a bit. Some people have knee injuries, others have shin splints, other have more like Achilles tendonitis or something. So I can't really say there's one particular injury that tends to happen more when you increase the mileage. Um, yeah, it's really like where an individual's weakness is, right? So, but it's good that you mentioned that because, like I said, science hasn't found like a maximum up to where like you should go when it comes to mileage, and when you go more than that, like it doesn't become effective anymore. But of course, every individual person has their limit of what they can handle. When I was an elite marathon runner myself for a long time, or I mean for maybe 2 years or so, I couldn't really run more than 100 miles a week because I got knee complaints every time that I had a knee issue. And then I think it was 2004 when I ran my personal best. I was able to run about 120 miles a week on average during the maybe 10 to 12 weeks marathon training. And at that time, I was able to. stop the knee injury because of, I think I was a combination of strength training and a supplement. I think chondroitin was it, or there's something. I think later they actually proved that it doesn't work for knee injuries, but it seemed to work for me. Um, I forgot the name of it. Glucosamine. Glucosamine. Have you heard of glucosamine?
Yes, yes, yes. They sell that at
Yeah,
most big stores here for joint pain.
yeah. So I read some scientific research into it, and it says like it doesn't really work. But for me, it worked. So I started swallowing that during my marathon preparation, and then combined that with doing certain specific strength exercises. And then, yeah, I started to handle more than 100 miles a week. I could go up to 120. But like I said, for me, it was the knee injury. For other people, it's Achilles or it's, yeah, something else like shin splints.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, as you said, every runner is different. I just wanted to see, the burnout. That was great that you mentioned that because I can see that happening when you're just doing it over and over again without any kind of break mentally. That's got to be hard too. But let me
Yeah,
ask you a little bit about strength
yeah.
training because, as you know, I went to the elite camp in Kenya to observe, and I didn't
Mm,
observe a lot of strength training. The coach there was aware that now there's scientific knowledge that strength training can help you. At the same time, he is coaching the top athletes in the world, and something is working, so he doesn't want to mess with it. So he's trying to figure that out. But I would
yeah.
like to hear your thoughts on implementing strength training and how much you would do of that when you are trying to train high volume. Also, obviously, I'm going to say this, and this is a little bit controversial, but obviously, if you weigh less, then you're going to be faster. Your VO2 max is going to be higher, just,
Mhm.
basic scientific stuff. And if you have a little bit less muscle, then you are gonna do better in long distance running too. So let me hear your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. I know what you mean with it's controversial because you don't want runners to, strive for being as light as possible because there's always, yeah, it's always a tricky thing. Of course, it can turn into something more dangerous, right? But yeah, I feel like strength training is very, very important, and especially for us more like Western people who are don't have such an active lifestyle as the Kenyans. So it's true that many Kenyans don't do a lot of strength training, but it's also true that most of them had an extremely active childhood where they would jump a lot, they would carry heavy weights. I mean, yeah, you've been to Kenya, so you know probably how it is. You run in a forest and you see girls and women carrying like lots of branches of trees on their back or lots of water. People literally carry like 40, 50 pounds on their back and walk up a hill with that, right? And then, yeah, they don't do strength training, but that's their life, right? So if you do that in your childhood versus now a child in the US or where I come from in the Netherlands who might cycle to school, but in many cases will be brought to school by a car, sits in school and sometimes doesn't do a lot of sports. When they start running, or someone who has a full-time job and sits behind the desk the whole day and they start running, they shouldn't look at the Kenyans and say, oh, they don't do strength training, so I shouldn't do it as well, right? Because those Kenyans, their core muscles, their back muscles, all their muscles are so much better conditioned than ours. So I definitely see a big impact from strength training, and especially that it makes runners more robust. So someone who says like, okay, I can't handle more than 30 miles a week because then I get injured, then my first thing is, okay, we're going to work on that. What kind of injuries do you get? And we're going to design a strength training for that. But generally, lifting weights once or twice a week um, will be helpful. And then another 1 or 2 sessions of just general strength and conditioning. So yeah, that's normally my go-to training when it comes to many amateur runners, like once a week lifting and twice a week general strength and conditioning to just make their body more robust. I feel like that's very helpful.
And what kind of exercises do you prescribe to your athletes? Are you a proponent of heavy lifting or more body weight stuff or functional stuff?
A combination. So I think heavy lifting is definitely proven to be effective for most runners. So, of course, if not, someone has never done it, you don't immediately put them under a barbell and let them lift very heavy. But it's definitely a goal for me to get people in the gym and lifting weights. Yes. Um, you know, in my whole career, I think as a coach, then I've had only one athlete, maybe two, for who heavy lifting didn't really work. And those were men with very like big muscles, very strong muscles, guys who are just generally already very strong. So probably there was not much added benefit to the strength training. But yeah, generally I feel like heavy lifting works. So we do 2 to 4 sets of 5 to maybe maximum 8 repetitions, and we do things like squats, deadlifts, cleans, barbell push press, lunges. Not everything at once in one session, but like maybe 30 to 45 minutes of lifting with a lot of recovery in between, of course. So yeah, you may do 4 exercises, and each exercise 3 to 4 sets. And like I said, just 6 to 8 repetitions or something, or 4 to 8 repetitions. So not too much. And then yeah, we try to build up the weight. So every time when they feel like it's getting a bit comfortable, we add some weight to it.
Okay. Yeah, that's a tough one. And I was kind of laughing in the beginning
Yeah.
when you said that because I try to implement strength training into my routine, and I don't have a lot of experience in lifting. And literally, the second my husband, who was my spotter, walked out when I was trying to do a deadlift, I pulled something in the back, and there goes my career as strength training. So
Oh,
it didn't even have weight on
yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's the bar, it's just the techniques are so particular, and it's so easy to get injured. And so it's so easy not to do that strength training. But I'm glad that you clarified that that is something that we should strive towards.
Yeah, but it's a very good point what you mentioned. I've been doing this since I think I started strength training or weightlifting when I was 16 or 17. And of course, the first 1 year or so, my coach was always there and checking on the technique, because that's really important. You don't just go to a gym and start lifting a heavy weight. First, the technique has to be good. Like the way you exercise the movement, the way you do it has to be good. So you actually need someone looking at you. That can be a gym instructor, and you can say, "Hey, I'm just starting without anything, just making the movement, and then start to use a barbell without any weight on it. But the barbell itself is already 20 kg, so that's like what, 40, about 40 pounds. Um, but yeah, you do have to build that up for sure. And yeah, if I can make some publicity for someone I'm using, so I'm actually using a program from an American coach. He's called Jason Fitzgerald, strengthrunning.com, and I feel like it's really helpful for me. So if the people find that interesting, I find it's a very good way to get into it. Yeah, it's just something I started with about 6 months ago or 8 months ago, just to get some more newer exercises, and I feel like it's very helpful. So yeah, I do believe. And you mentioned the weight. Of course, that's also an issue. If like I'm 60 kg, that's, I don't know exactly how many pounds that is, but I think about 130.
Hmm.
Um, but if I get a runner who is like 180 or 200 pounds, then I know that there's a big risk of knee injuries, and that I know they can't handle. Like if they do 50 miles a week, that's like comparable with 80 miles for me, because I'm a much lighter runner. So the impact on my joints and my tendons is totally different from the runner who is like, 180 pounds, right? So you do have to take that into account when you're a heavier runner. You can't handle as much mileage, and you may want to just, out of prevention, want to combine running with cycling, or with elliptical, cross training. Yeah, and the more you run, if you depending on your body composition, if the 180 pounds is mostly muscles, then it might be hard to get rid of. But if you're just a little bit overweight, then of course doing more running will make you lighter, and that will also help you to handle more mileage.
Right, right. No, that makes sense. And thank you for pitching the Jason Fitzgerald stuff. He's very interesting. I like his stuff as well. Now, when it comes to increasing
Okay.
your mileage, you were already saying that one thing to consider, obviously, every person is different, is weight. But if we're talking about the average runner that is not overweight, that is in okay shape, that is starting, maybe it's been running for a couple years, and obviously you don't want to do things too fast, but how do you increase the mileage? Is there a method? Because I know in the US, a lot of people say don't increase your mileage for more than 10%, which I'm not sure that rule makes a lot of sense because if you're then at 80 miles, then you're increasing 8 miles versus when you're running, 10 miles, it's 1 mile. So what are your thoughts on that? How do
Yeah.
you safely do that?
Yeah. I don't really know where that 10% rule comes from. I found it a little odd also. But what I normally do is I fluctuate the mileage. So I feel like that's the best way, easiest way for people to go into new territory. Because when you've ever done, for example, 60 miles in your life and you're now at 30 miles, it's much easier to increase the miles up to, to go back to what you used to do, to go back to 60. But let's say you're at 30 miles a week or 20 miles a week and you've done more. That's where you are, and you try to increase from there. So what I normally try to do is just have 1 week of slightly more. And yeah, how much would that be? Maybe another, it would be rare for me to increase with more than 6 kilometers or 4 miles in a week, right? So maybe I would add another 3 to 4 miles in a week and then have a lower week again, right? So if someone does maybe, let's say, 30 miles a week, then we would put 1 week of like 33 or 34 miles, but then the next week would be again maybe 25 or 26 miles, right? And then, of course, I monitor the athlete, and the athlete monitors her or himself, right? So, are there any complaints? Make sure there's enough like easy runs where they can feel their body so that, sometimes there's a risk if you have too many workouts, then people tend to be so, how do you say, kind of worked up to do the workout that you don't really notice any kind of pain or discomfort you may have. But if you then have an easy run, that's when you realize, okay, actually my right leg doesn't feel okay. Actually, my left hip is a bit funny, right? So yeah, then I know we have to be careful. But if I increase the mileage with 3 to 4 miles, and then the next week we do a bit less again, and it feels all fine for someone, then we increase a little bit more, right? So um, but yeah, we generally, if someone has never done more than, for example, 30 miles in a week, we don't go to 50 or 60 miles within one season, like within 1 year, right? So I don't keep on increasing. We go maybe from 30 to 34, then a week of 25 or 26 miles, then maybe a week of 36 or 37, another week of 25 or 30 miles, and kind of exploring the territory in that way. And then we stabilize at a little bit higher mileage without continuing to increase.
Okay, that makes a lot of
So
sense. Another question I had in regards to increasing your mileage was I once had, well, a good friend of mine who used to be an elite runner. He used to run 209s in the 80s. He is now pretty much my neighbor and
right.
close
Yeah,
friend.
yeah.
And he would give me a plan and I would follow it. And eventually, after a couple years, we started doing double runs. And he was a huge fan of double runs. In the mornings on Sundays, he would have me do a hard run of 16 miles. This is, on peak sessions before the marathon. And then in the evening,
Right.
five easy miles, something like that. So double runs in general, I had a good experience with them. I know people hate them. What are your thoughts on double runs and
Okay.
how far is too far to spread them out? Like saying, if you're training for an ultra, for example, I've seen people run 20 miles on a Saturday and 20 miles on a Sunday, and that's because in the
Mhm.
future they're going to run a 100 miler. So, what are your thoughts on double runs?
Right. Yeah, double miles can be a good tool for sure if people can handle it. So I've had some of my runners, of course, obviously elite runners all do double runs. Um, and amateur runners, depending on if they can handle it, if they have the time for it. But yeah, some of those that I coach, they do that also. We know that. Um, so one interesting thing is that if you're kind of tired from a previous session, so if you trained in the morning and then you do another session in the afternoon, your body produces apparently more of a certain hormone called PGC1 alpha. And PGC1 alpha is quite important for distance runners because it's the hormone that stimulates the production of mitochondria. So when we see that there's more PGC1 alpha produced, then as runners we should be happy about that because that's going to help us to be better runners, and especially doing 2 runs on a day can be helpful in that way because you're basically doing your second run when you're already tired from your first run, right? So, but there can be a trade-off because doing a run when you're already tired um, can also potentially impact your immune system a little bit. Like, your glycogen levels are low. You're going to do another run, so they will continue to be low, or might be even a bit lower. So yeah, but we also know if your glycogen levels are low for a considerable amount of time, then you're a little bit more likely to catch a common cold or a flu or something like that. So I would say runners can definitely try these things out, but they should, on a day that they double, they have to take care of themselves very much. Like, eat good, drink good, try to rest in between. Um, because if you just kind of have to squeeze it in your day, then it's probably not the best thing to do.
Okay. And I guess along that line,
Yeah.
what are some other strategies that you give to your athletes to prevent overtraining and injury when people are engaging in high volume, whether it be with double runs or not?
That's a good one, actually. Yeah, I'm okay. When it comes to recovery, I think a few things are important. The first one is sleep, of course. So I don't believe so much in like magic tools. And I know there's lots of stuff on the market where they say, okay, wear those kind of boots or to create that extra recovery and all kind of supplements. I think if you look at most elite runners, they're not big into that. And Kenyans definitely are not. But I would say if I have to pick like the 4 most important things to recover, it's first of all, sleep. And secondly, having a proper diet, like make sure you get enough carbohydrates and some essential proteins. And you can do that generally without supplements. You don't really need supplements for that, but you can consider a protein supplement on very heavy days. And then, yeah, the third and fourth would be natural things like spending time in nature and having people around you to talk with. And um, I mean, we know that people recover better when they hang out with others, when they socialize, compared with when they're going to work or when they're going to be on their phones or are just going to be busy. So I think those are, if you when you are in Kenya, I think that's what you see, right? People have finished their training. First of all, they spend their whole day in nature because life is in nature. They hang out with each other, they have a cup of tea, and it may look like, oh, they're not doing anything scientific to recover. But we know from science that the best ways to recover is spending time with others, hanging out, socializing, spending time in nature, right? So, yeah, those make for optimal recovery. I would not recommend an ice bath. Generally, ice bath or cryotherapy is not going to help you to recover better, although some people feel good about it. But what we know from science is that it actually, it can block your improvement because it takes away a part of the inflammation in your muscle, and you need that inflammation actually to get stronger because that's the stimulus your body needs to create improvement. And apart from that, it restricts certain amino acids coming to your muscles. So I wouldn't recommend ice bath or cryotherapy. Um, Other things people can think about and what works for some people is sauna. We do know that there can be a positive effect from maybe 2 or 3 times a week using a hot sauna. Your body actually produces a little bit more, what's it called? Human growth hormone when you go to the sauna, a hot sauna for like 20 to 30 minutes. So that can be a positive thing for your recovery. Um, yeah, and massage can help. Personally, I always use a foam roller once or twice a week. Other people prefer an actual massage. Others, again, sorry, like massage doesn't really work for them. So I feel like that's a little bit personal, and it depends maybe also on the type of massage you get. But yeah, those are typically things that I would recommend when it comes to recovery. I think the most important is like you finish the hard workout, the first 2 hours after that are the most important. Then you need rest and you need to eat and drink, right? So if you skip that part, if it's like you have a workout, you take a shower and you go to your job, then it's going to be much harder to recover than if you have at least like 2 hours at home to relax and make sure you eat enough and drink enough. I think that is the most essential part.
Okay. And I feel like you kind of hit the nail on the head for me on that one because one of the first observations that I made when I went to that training camp in Kenya is you have these elite athletes that have been winning the major marathons and they don't use those boots and they don't sit there and,
Yeah,
shake up their protein shakes. They literally just get done running. They have their tea with milk and then they eat
yeah,
and then they sleep. And that was kind of,
yeah,
an interesting insight to that in that industry that has grown so much, right? Because the running industry makes billions of dollars on people like us that want the magic pill to something or the magic protein shake or recovery drink that's going to make us awesome. And in reality, the fastest runners just do exactly what you said, and there's not much else to it.
yeah. That's true, and it was the same for me and most elite runners that I knew when I was an elite runner. There's not only Kenyans; it's also many others. Of course, there are some exceptions, but generally elite runners keep it simple, right? And of course, if you train very hard, sometimes you need a little bit extra, right? So in my case, my iron levels tended to drop when I would train very hard, so I often needed an iron supplement to make sure my ferritin and hemoglobin were staying at a, wouldn't get like insufficient. Um, and something like vitamin C is often used by people to make sure that, their immune system is like at least that that they don't get, too low in that. And for the rest, it depends on the person. But yeah, I found it interesting. When I was in Kenya and we were with lots of elite runners, and there was actually an amateur runner coming who was like a lot slower than us, and she came with all these tablets and pills and all these you know, cups and filled with stuff that she would take. Like this is for Tuesday, this is for Wednesday, then to get me ready for the session on Wednesday, and then this is for Thursday for recovery, and this is for Friday. And I was like, wow, I think you can actually learn more from the Kenyans by just resting and sleeping and taking proper recovery than using so much tablets. And I think yeah, many elites don't really do that. You take what's needed because you are maybe yeah, you do a blood test once in 3 to 6 months, and you see if you have certain deficiencies, and if you have a deficiency, you may need a supplement for something. But other than that, you don't just look for stuff, And apart from that, as elite runners, of course, you have to be careful not to take anything that is potentially doping, right? And some products might be contaminated, so you have to be. That's why you also have to be careful with that. But I think the major thing is that most elites understand what works and what doesn't work, right? So they have that understanding like it's mostly about training and resting, eating and sleeping good. And like the Kenyans take their chai, that's their protein drink, right? Because there's milk into that. And yeah, then if they have the money for it, they take meat in the evening or fish. But sometimes they don't have much money, and then the only proteins they take are beans and a bit of milk. But yeah, it's
Yeah, that nutrition was very,
it's a lot
very
simpler than.
sorry. Yeah, the nutrition was very low fat, lots of vegetables. Obviously, ugali for the carbs is what they eat over there, which I guess brings me to my last question, which is a bonus question. I'm going to call it a bonus question because it's not really related to the topic of high volume. But another observation that I made while I was there was that they do their 21K in the mornings, usually easy run if they don't have a workout. So that's about 13 miles. And when they do that, they go fasted. And I know that's maybe another thing, or maybe not, but there are so many different opinions and controversial opinions whether or not a person should be running fasted in the mornings. They do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a good one. I used to do and still do most of my runs fasted, and I think if you look at the science behind it, I would say it's as long as you can handle it, it's good to try to do easy and moderate runs fasted, like without any breakfast before it. But when it comes to any quality session, it doesn't make any sense, right? So you don't want to do a real quality session. So then I'm talking about running at your half marathon pace or faster for most runners. If you know you have a session like that, like a proper workout, you want to eat something, right? So even if you have to do that in the morning, let's say you're limited in time, I would say definitely take a banana or something, put something in your stomach. You need some carbs to get better quality. So basically, doing a session like that without carbs in the morning makes your body to use much more fats, and that's just not as efficient as carbs. So you definitely want to have breakfast for that. But when it comes to easy and moderate running, I think it can probably be beneficial to do some of your runs fasted. Yes. Um, so I would definitely recommend people try that out. Yeah.
What happens if you run your run fasted to your body? Just
Well, yeah. I would say the main thing, of course, is that you um, teach your body to run a little bit more on the fat burning. So, like the fat oxidation, you call it, right? So, your body uses fat as a fuel source. And okay, still, whether your body uses fat or carbs depends mostly on the speed you're running. So, the faster you run, your body will choose for carbs. Right, but now that's why I say if you're going to run fast, like you're going to do a hill work session or you're going to do shorter intervals or any kind of HIIT training, you need carbs because if you don't have the carbs, your body wants to choose the carbs, but it can't really. So it uses the fat, but that's not so effective. But now when you run easy, your body normally has a mixture of using carbs and using fat. And then it depends a little bit on what you ate or if you ate in the morning. So if you didn't eat, your body will use a little higher percentage of fat compared with carbs. Whereas if you do eat just before your training, your body tends to say like, hey, there's lots of carbs now in the bloodstream and it's going around, so it's much easier for your body to use those carbs. So, and I think it's good for us as runners to sometimes practice that fat oxidation or the using of fat as a source of energy.
okay, perfect. Hugo, thank you so much for your time. And maybe you want to let our listeners know or viewers where they can find you if they want to.
Sure. So yeah, maybe they can go to our website kenyacamp.com. That's kenya-camp.com. They can find all information there about me and my team and what we are doing. And yeah, I think that's the best place to go. And welcome everyone to come to Kenya and train with us here and learn from the Kenyans. And yeah, I don't know if you're also going to tell people already about our upcoming camp or not yet.
I think that's a good way of maybe introducing it. So, yes, we are planning a camp together for February of next year. And it's going to be amazing. And we'll have information available soon. We'll have that website up running very soon.
Yeah, I look forward to that and hope to welcome many people to Kenya to show how beautiful it is here and you know, and immersing them in the Kenyan running culture.
Yes, absolutely. It's going to be a one of a kind experience. So thank you again, Hugo. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Letty. Thanks for having me. Bye bye.